Welcome to the Chapter 25 Flipped Classroom. In this classroom, we're going to go over the New Worlds, the Americas, and Oceania in Chapter 25. And I want to start by taking a look at this map because this map, you might notice, is very different than the map that you have in your book of colonization. And the biggest difference is that the pattern on this map is very coastal, whereas the pattern in your book for conquest covers entire areas. So for example, here we see the Spanish-controlled territory, and there's no territory entering Brazil. We can see that there is expansion up into New Spain, but not into what the Spanish controlled up here. This is actually a much more accurate map of what colonization probably looked like. Even though colonial powers controlled huge swaths of territory, really their influence was restricted in certain areas. So here are the main ideas of this chapter, along with the key concepts that will be covered. And as you can see, there are a lot of key concepts that will be covered. These will kind of jump around as we move through the chapter. So before the end of the 15th century, the Western and Eastern hemispheres existed almost in complete isolation from one another. This situation began to change after the voyage of Christopher Columbus in 1492. From this point on, the contact between the two increased dramatically, often with disastrous consequences for the indigenous people of the Americas. The Europeans had superior weaponry, such as steel and gunpowder, but their greatest weapon was one that they didn't even know they had: smallpox. Smallpox completely decimated the indigenous populations of the Americas, as we learned about in the previous chapter 23. As time went on, slavery and other forms of coerced labor were essential for the types of economies set up in both North and South America, particularly in South America when it came to chattel slavery or slavery of or ownership, thinking of slaves as property. But that also went on in North America, as we know. And Australia and the Pacific Islands would undergo a similar experience about 200 years after or later, but that doesn't happen until period at 5. At this time, they're pretty much existing in isolation still. We're going to start this PowerPoint by looking at the conquest of the Americas. So this whole collision starts with Columbus. The first people of the Americas to come into contact with the Europeans are the Taino, who lived in the Caribbean. After Columbus made Hispaniola his base of operations and established a fort of Santo Domingo, he initially attempted to build trading posts to allow European merchants to trade with the indigenous population. Now, of course, he thought he was in Asia. So he was thinking to himself, oh, sweet, I'm going to get amazing goods from this. And these Taino did not have the types of goods that he thought that they had. The experience of the Taino, ranging from forced labor under the encomienda system, where Columbus was allowed by the Queen to use the indigenous people who were, in fact, her quote-unquote subjects for labor, to the Taino's experience with smallpox, sets a precedent or a pattern that will be repeated with Cortez and the Aztecs and Pizarro and the Inca. Between 1519 and 1521, Hernan Cortez and about 450 men brought down the powerful Aztec state. We're going to learn about this in the 7 Myths of the Spanish Conquest later in class. He had technological advantages such as horses and dogs, steel, but mainly he had disease. And not only did Cortez and the Spaniards bring with them disease, but they also brought with them mosquitoes and rats. two things that had never been in the Americas before. And mosquitoes carry something important. They carry yellow fever, which is also very deadly. Cortez used the divisions of the Aztec state, which already had seeds of dissent within it, and he also used a woman named Malinche. She was an indigenous woman whose brothers were brought into slavery and killed by the Aztecs. And she translated for Cortez. She is never mentioned in Spanish documents. However, she plays a prominent role in the codices that we're going to see in just a second. In the end, the Aztecs, or Mexica, were really brought down through smallpox and their own divisions. And like I said, the Incas suffered a similar fate under Francisco Pizarro and an even smaller force in the 1530s. Here we see a post-conquest codice, and you can see Malinche here. She's also known as Dona Marina. Her children are the first mestizos, the first mixed between indigenous and European. She's like a kind of a Pocahontas figure of Mexico, and she's a very prominent figure there today. You can see all these different shields that these guys are carrying, denoting the different alliances within the Aztec Empire. In the next part of the PowerPoint, we're going to go over the end of this rule ends very briefly, the rule of the conquistadors. And we're going to go over the Spanish imperial rule and the Portuguese rule and the types of economies that South America had.